Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Welcome, everyone, to a live stream broadcast of the show Progressive Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor, and I am the host today. On today's agenda, we have a very short weekly update of news that happened this week. Then we're going to talk about a segment entitled Unpacking the Democratic National Convention. And today we're going to talk about what happened outside on the streets during the convention while the rest of us were inside. And then the last half of the show will be about the battle of opposing liquid natural gas terminals in Oregon. And just so you know, next week we'll have the final segment on the Democratic National Convention, and that will be on what happened inside the convention itself. So for the weekly update, we are pleased to announce that the Progressive Caucus is now a recognized organization by Our Revolution. That gives us access to all of their tools and data, and also helps us reach out to all the other progressive supporters in the state of Oregon. Last week, we talked about a possible nominating convention for House District 35. We were contacted by Representative Margaret Doherty, and she said that she has absolutely no plans to resign my position. So it looks like there will not be a nominating convention there at all. So we don't know where that rumor came from, but that one has gone away. And then the third thing that happened recently was that Phil Knight of Nike gave Knute Buehler $500,000 for his campaign to run for governor. So that really amped up his campaign. So it'll be a very interesting race next year for the governor of the state of Oregon. So we'll now go to the first segment entitled Unpacking the Democratic National Convention Outside the Convention. So first up, I have two guests today. I have Jacob Van Buskirk, and then we have James Barber. Both were outside in the streets. And so first up, we'll have Jacob talk about what his experience was and what happened over the couple of days. Jacob?
Hello, everyone. I was there at the Democratic National Convention and before, and it was very interesting to see the sort of lead up. I actually was there for the full month beforehand, so I saw them sort of preparing, and there was a fair amount of small protests before the convention ever happened, including some protests of the way they were getting corporate sponsors for the convention. And then starting really on Sunday before the convention began on Monday, there was an enormous environment or a climate change protest that involved thousands and thousands of people slowly marching about a mile. And then from there, things sort of became more Bernie-centric, I would say, or anti-DNC in the sense that there was a giant park that was fenced off as a space that people could, as a sort of a free speech zone. And there was hundreds of people camping there, who'd traveled all the way across the country. There was a large contingent from California, and they'd driven across the country, picking up more people as they went. So that whole caravan arrived on Sunday, and they stayed the entire length of the convention there in the park as peaceful protesters. And then there were also local people who were protesting. There was an enormous Black Lives Matter protest, I believe on Monday, that involved thousands and thousands of people. And marched several miles. And the general theme for many of us that were there from across the country was that there had been an unfair selection process in many, many states and overall, and that the corruption of the DNC was not acceptable and our voices needed to be heard. The central theme of that is not just that we didn't think that it was fair and that Hillary Clinton probably hadn't actually won, but that even if she had won fairly, she wasn't listening to the other side. She wasn't listening to the 46% of people who were able to vote that said they wanted Bernie Sanders and his ideas to represent them on the national level. And so that frustration was felt throughout the week and was being demonstrated for peacefully with signs. You can see the picture, I believe, of a very large crowd holding many signs. And if any of you have been to protests, you know that the pictures never really do it justice. There were thousands and thousands of people there and peacefully stating that this is not acceptable. And they got very little attention and basically had no ability to interact with Democratic officials or the delegates because there was an enormous fence or series of fences, really. If you imagine your local sports arena and the convention was happening inside the sports arena, the fence was on the furthest edge of the largest parking lot. So several thousand feet away was the closest that any protester could get to the actual site of the convention. And the supposed reason for that is security. And in reality, I think they didn't want protesters to be able to communicate effectively with delegates. And I spoke to the delegates and no delegates who tried to come out, and it took them over an hour to exit from the convention to go get on the other side of the fence and speak to protesters. And that's just sort of ridiculous if you think about protest as a form of free speech. I think that basically covers it, Larry. You got anything else?
No, we do have some footage from the Wednesday night protest. So if we could cue that up and share just sort of how the Wednesday night ended.
Around, and they're now going down Broad Street. They were just sitting down on the street right outside of Patterson and Broad, right facing the AT&T station, but they are now marching down Broad Street. Who knows where they're going, but they appear to be somewhere in this area. And also we want to give you a look at what's going on just to make sure things don't get too out of hand. We have groups of police, pockets of police outside in this area. Now, as you said, things did get a little tense. We want to go to some video that we have from earlier, and we have some news from NBC News investigation team. We can tell you that there was a outer fence that was broken and rushed near Broad Street outside the Wells Fargo Center. Several people did get through the outer fence and have been taken into custody. The fence is secured now, and there's no breach to the Secret Service controlled perimeter. Now, what we can tell you is inside this group, we've had a lot of burnings.
I think that was the major point of activity that happened, but by and large, the whole event was peaceful. We also have on the line James Barber, who was outside. Could we switch to James?
Hi, Larry.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I was at the national convention. I wasn't a Bernie national delegate, but I did get to attend as a +1. And I stayed with the Oregon delegation at their hotel. And we spent, we had a lottery system that allowed the +1s to attend the actual convention, a certain number of them each day. And I was able to attend the very first day when Bernie did his speech and got that 3-minute standing ovation, which was amazing. But the rest of the time I spent outside the convention. And I got to say, the day inside the convention, it was very not real. It was a show. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of things going on that were happening naturally. And outside the convention, that's where it was real. There was a lot of emotion out there. There were people that care. They really care about what's going on in this country, and they're fed up with seeing what was going on and not being heard. That was the biggest part, is people just did not get a chance to be heard. Their grievances with the process didn't have a chance to be addressed. And so we saw protests day after day, and we were there until 1 and 2 and 3 in the morning out in the park next to the convention center. And at some point during that week, I was thinking, what can we do? What can we do just as people outside there? And it didn't seem like what we were doing outside was even getting any attention, and it certainly wasn't being played inside. So I decided to switch my focus a little bit and we had gotten some journals from the every delegate got some journals in a swag bag, and I decided that we're going to use those, and I'm going to go around to the people inside and outside, and we're going to get heartfelt messages to Bernie in these journals, because we knew Bernie was going to come talk to our delegation Thursday morning at our breakfast. And so I spent the week just walking around as much as I could, getting as many stories to Bernie as I could. And one that really sticks out in my mind, I didn't read any of the stories before I gave them to Bernie, but one of them that stuck out in my mind was it was probably after midnight outside during one of the protests, and there was this young, tough-looking kid, and I went up to him and I asked him, I said, "Hey, would you like to leave a message for Bernie?" And he says, sure, and he gets it, and he looked at it, and he opened the book, and he started thinking about it, and then he just started crying. And it was so touching. He handed it back to me. He said, "Come back in a few minutes. I definitely want to do this, but I just need a few minutes to collect myself." That was just the kind of emotions that were running rampant outside that convention center, and it was pretty amazing. So ultimately, I did hand Bernie up that Thursday morning, along with, if anybody's seen inside the convention, we had some wonderful skirt banners with bright green lettering that the Oregon delegation had smuggled in and held up, and we also got to give one of those to Bernie as well, and that was pretty special.
Okay, we also have a video clip that James took of Bernie Sanders when he came and spoke with the delegation, and we're going to cue that up next. What's most interesting is that he was speaking to both the Clinton delegates and the Sanders delegates, and as you can hear from the clip, he didn't hold anything back or modify his message.
Everybody sit down, please sit down. I want to just say a few things this morning. Number one is that the political revolution that we are engaged in has not ended. And if I have anything to say about it, it will not end. It continues. All of you know, because I know people in this room are smart and you've studied history, and you know that real change never takes place from the top on down, that real change is not just about electing somebody. That's very important. I don't want to minimize that. But real change always takes place when millions of people become involved in the political process and engage in the struggle for justice. That's the history of the trade union movement. It's the history of the civil rights movement, history of the women's movement, history of the gay movement, history of the environmental movement. It is never the case that somebody on top says, "Oh, I have a good idea. I think we should make gay marriage legal. Oh, that was a great idea." That's not what happens. It happens that people struggle. Think about the civil rights movement, the number of people who went to jail and died in that struggle. What the political revolution is about is engaging millions of people in our country in the struggle for social, economic, racial, and environmental justice. And that struggle
That was an amazing morning to spend with Senator Sanders, who drove about an hour to Valley Forge, where our hotel was, from downtown Philly, to come and thank the delegation. Oregon was the only closed primary state that gave him a win. Did you have anything to add, James?
No, that was great. Thanks for doing this.
Okay. Well, that ends the segment on the Democratic National Convention, and then next week we will finish off with what happened inside the convention that you probably didn't see on the television. Thank you, James, and thank you, Jacob.
Thanks, Larry.
So the next segment is going to be on the battle against liquid natural gas terminals in Oregon. I have today with me Cheryl Johnson, who I've worked with since the early 2000s on the battle. And then in Douglas County, I have John Clark and Richard Chase, who will be talking about the pipeline, which is related to the LNG issue, but is affecting everyone's lives who owns property across the lower half of the state. So in Clatsop County, I think Clatsop County was where it started. We had, I think at one point there were 4 or 5 LNG projects that were going on here at the mouth of the Columbia. The 2 big ones, though, were Bradwood Landing and Oregon LNG, which we fought. So if we could go to the slide that shows the map, I will turn the microphone over to Cheryl, who will talk about the struggle that we've had since 2004 to stop these facilities.
Indeed, in 2004, the specter of liquefied natural gas coming up the Columbia River or going down the Columbia River raised its ugly head. And at one point, there were 4 proposals. It very quickly sifted down into 2 proposals. And what happened was in communities all along the Columbia River, both the Washington side and the Oregon side, the local communities began to organize themselves and say, what can we do to stop this? And so there were people who were close to the terminals who were getting organized. There were people who were affected by the pipelines who were getting organized. So it was this interesting collection of folks all along the Columbia River. And what we figured out right away is that there was no way in the world we could do this by ourselves. So we began to reach out to environmental groups all across the Northwest. And the one who came and decided to stand with us to fight this was Columbia Riverkeeper. And we forged this really beautiful relationship so that there are activists everywhere and a national organization that was willing to go to court with us and lend us expertise. And one of the things that we began to do was to educate ourselves and to educate our neighbors and our community. And we spent a lot of time in court during those years. And we also spent a lot of time working on democracy at a really grassroots level. This all began in 2004. And in 2008, in Clatsop County, we put together a referendum on no pipelines in parks. It was very interesting. We had not run a referendum, at least we hadn't in Clatsop County before. And we did lots of education, lots of going door to door. It was a standalone election, and we had a 58% voter turnout on that referendum. And we won that referendum by 67%. So at that point in time, you could not put an LNG pipeline through anything in Clatsop County that was designated parks. And that piece of democracy at the grassroots level contributed to the final defeat. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet to defeat any of these huge fossil fuel infrastructures, but it's a lot of pieces coming together over time. And in May of 2010, one of the 2, Bradwood Landing, finally suspended their permitting, and that was the headlines on the newspaper. And then the following day, the headlines in the newspaper are that they had declared bankruptcy. In the meantime, the other Oregon LNG was still perking along. And one of the things that happened again at the grassroots level was elections. Clatsop County has 5 county commissioners, and they had siting authority over the pipeline. The pipeline was laid out originally to bisect Clatsop County diagonally, and it would have gone through a lot of private property. And then that brings up the whole issue of condemnation of private property. And at that point in time, we had 4 of the county commissioners who were voting yes to permit the LNG pipeline. And so we got really busy and we went and recruited local candidates. We worked to get those candidates elected in a real basic grassroots way. We made phone calls, we did phone banking from people's kitchen tables. We went door to door. we did real boots on the ground, old-fashioned, hardcore democracy. We were hoping to elect one, had our fingers crossed for two, and we successfully put in 3 new county commissioners in Clatsop County. And at that point, then things began to turn around, and then they didn't have complete control over that permitting anymore.
Yeah, and what was most interesting is that the first thing that happened after the new commission took office was they asked for the resignations of all the planning commission, right?
Yes, correct.
Because they had just been rubber stamping the projects that had been coming through. And that was the first thing that got people's attention. And then the second thing they did was that they revoked the permit because it really violated the zoning of the property. And then that ended up being in court for another 4 years. But we prevailed, and that was the death knell, along with the bankruptcy of Bradwood Landing. Just to show you some shots of where this occurs. So the slide of the Lower Columbia, I believe this is the site of Bradwood Landing. These corporations love coming into rural counties because they sell them on economic benefits of what they're bringing. They greatly exaggerate the benefits that are going to be brought. We're going to be talking a little bit later about the promises they've made to Coos Bay. And these poor people that in economically depressed areas listen to them and they think, oh, this is a godsend for us. This is what we've been waiting for. When in fact, these are actually large industrial complexes that are inconsistent with the reasons why we live in areas like this. Going to the next slide, this is the Oregon LNG site adjacent to the Warrenton mooring basin. This is a basin full of small fishing boats, and all the property beyond what you see is going to be liquid natural gas storage tanks, and then the piping and the condensation facilities. And the next slide actually shows a model of what that would look like. And the little sliver of water in the upper left is where the mooring basin is. One
of the interesting things in this process is that when all of this began in 2004, these companies were saying that there was a great need to import liquefied natural gas because we needed this fossil fuel in the United States. Over time, as we were fighting this, the economy changed, and then pretty soon they didn't need to import it anymore, but there was a great need to export it.
Yeah, and these are East Coast corporations. They don't live here. They don't have any connections with Oregon, and they really don't care where they site these things. They just go to the communities where they're going to find hopefully the least amount of resistance and put them in. What was most tragic about Warrenton was that they had no provisions for bolstering the fire department or any kind of emergency facilities. As we've seen in the gas pipeline explosions in California, these things can destroy literally acres of ground where they're buried. And there was absolutely no provision for fire trucks or anything to fight. And so if Warrenton was going to have any of those things, it would have been on a financial burden on the residents. And it's a very tiny community, and they could never afford what they would need to be sufficiently prepared in case one of these things exploded.
So safety was a major concern for both the terminals and the pipelines. And one of the other major concerns was the amount of destruction that would happen to the Columbia River. They have to dredge acres and acres of land in the Columbia River. And the Columbia River estuary is the salmon nursery for 13 species of salmon on the Columbia River that are either endangered or threatened at this point in time. And the Columbia River estuary is also the nursery for the juvenile salmon and part of the lifetime journey of the salmon, both up and down the river. And they would have destroyed a lot of those really critical habitat for salmon.
And today out in Astoria, if you're looking at the river, you'd see about 100 fishing boats parked and zipping around because it's fishing season. I believe one of the things that had to happen when one of these LNG boats came in is that they'd have to evacuate the river for wasn't it something like 2 miles around the boat?
Yes, there's a safety zone around the LNG terminals coming in or going out.
However that would work, I guess all the fishermen would have to pull into shore or whatever until the thing docked, and then when it loaded up, they'd have to evacuate the county or the river again.
And commercial fishing and is part of the history and the culture of this community. So both sport fishing and commercial fishing already provides employment and a part of the economy to our communities. And the LNG terminals would have destroyed that part of the economy that is already functioning.
The key message here that we want everyone to understand is that we do live in a democracy, and you can change the course of history. People in the beginning would go to the hearings conducted by the county commissioners, and they would spend hours going until 10:30, 11, midnight, trying to convince the commissioners that this stuff is not wanted, and giving testimony against the terminals, and none of that did any good. The protest didn't work. So we have slides of people doing protests against it. We finally turned to the electoral process because we figured out that if we couldn't change their minds, then we would have to replace them. In 2008, we ran two candidates, one won and one lost, but we learned from that. And then, as Cheryl said, in 2010 was when we ran 3 candidates. None had held public office before. We found 2 of the candidates within 4 days of the filing deadline, and was able to run them basically on this issue, and they won, displacing 3 incumbent candidates. And for anyone who knows about electoral politics, defeating an incumbent candidate is a tall order. We've stayed on top of this, and we have now won 11 out of 11 county commissioner races here in Columbia County. We have run every race since 2010 that's been conducted. So on slide 17, you can see Cheryl and her partner holding up the sign of Bradwood Landing halting LNG. And then on the next slide, you can see the protesters as recently as December of 2015. This is when I realized that the protest out here had evolved from a local community effort to a statewide effort. There were protesters from all over the state outside of the holiday party of the Democratic Party of Oregon in December of that year, greeting them with these signs and trying to get across the message that these terminals were not welcome.
And so we were able to defeat Bradwood in 2010, but it took us until 2016 to defeat Oregon LNG. So from 2004 to 2016, more than a decade for communities to work together to defeat these huge fossil fuel industries.
So next we're going to talk about the pipeline issues.
Not yet. First, you're going to answer some questions from the audience because you've been flying through at light speed, man. You're just like warp 9 today.
Too much information. Let's have some questions.
Hey, Betsy, do we have any questions from the audience? Betsy, you there? We had Betsy mute because we were hearing cars. All right, maybe we won't take questions from the audience today.
I have a comment.
No, I'm here.
Oh, hi, Betsy.
Sorry about that. Phil Britton, who, when, and what laws gave the extraction industry carte blanche to rape our planet? Eminent domain laws only profit Exxon and the Koch brothers.
That's almost a great setup question because we're going to talk about that next. So hold that thought.
Maybe we'll hold the other 2 questions that came up during this segment for the end because they're all kind of interrelated. How about that?
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Was there a comment from Douglas County?
Yeah, I had a comment. It's interesting because down here we have been looking at this thing the same time. Jordan Cove said all along that all the hippies and environmentalists in Portland would kill the 2 LNG terminals up there, and Jordan Cove would be ready to go. But I think it's significant that, Betsy, you're saying, well, originally this was to import, and then the market changed. The market didn't change. These guys were lying from the gate. And these CEOs know darn good and well the kind of volumes of natural gas that fracking was producing. And there was a market to export in the Far East, and this import was a deception to justify the eminent domain. They from the gate, they knew this was for export. And every other single LNG terminal that has been licensed immediately turned around and filed for export.
Thank you. Going back to the pipeline, so this is another reason why it would be great if Democrats across the state would get involved with the Democratic Party, because one of the things that we do every 2 years, and we will be doing in March of 2018, is revisiting the platform of the Democratic Party of Oregon and fine-tuning it for the next couple of years. And the platform is the beliefs of the represents the beliefs of the Democrats of Oregon, and in theory is a guiding document for the people we elect in the legislature. So in the 2016 platform, there's Article 5, number 9, that says, we believe eminent domain should never be used for the benefit of a private or corporate entity in the absence of a clear public need. And then Article 6, number 1, was one that the No LNG folks got together and supported. Was we oppose the development of Oregon coastal regions for the export of fossil fuels. So those are planks in the platform of the Democratic Party of Oregon. So so the question was, how do corporations then get the ability to do this? In 2007 and 2009, there were attempts to get bills passed in the Oregon legislature that gave eminent domain to the corporations wanting to put pipelines across the state of Oregon. And both those efforts were stopped. We got to 2011, and we had House Bill 2700, which finally got all the way through. And when you read it, you go, it's very difficult to unpack what it is really for, because they use language that is not familiar to us. So nowhere do they say eminent domain, and nowhere do they say pipelines. But what it does say is it allows persons that proposes removal or fill activity for construction or maintenance of linear facilities to apply for removal or fill permit. So that's the summary version of the law, but baked into the detail is what this really says is it gives the ability to grant eminent domain to the LNG corporations to condemn land to run the pipelines across the state of Oregon, because the landowners didn't want them. Unfortunately, this is where we get into the whole issue of corporate Democrats versus Democrats that represent the people. Unfortunately, this bill was sponsored by Mike Schaffler, David Hunt, Brad Witt, and Tobias Reed, all Democrats. And in the final vote in the House, 16 Democrats voted for it, along with 24 Republicans. So you can see that the Republicans were all for this. We had 14 Democrats and 9 Republicans vote against it. In the Senate, it was a little bit more lopsided towards the Democrats. So there were 11 Democrats that voted for it and 9 Republicans that voted for it. And then 5 Democrats and 4 Republicans voted no. The Democrats who voted yes for this include Margaret Doherty, who we talked about earlier in the show, Sarah Gelser, Val Hoyle, who was Speaker of the House and now wants to run for Labor Commissioner next year, Rod Monroe, who we've already talked about in previous shows. He was the member of the Senate who blocked both the National Popular Vote legislation and the tenants' rights legislation, even though there was overwhelming Democratic support for both of those issues. Tobias Reed, who is now the state treasurer, Arnie Roblin, who's now the state senator for the Coos Bay area, Tina Kotek, who's the current Speaker of the House, Brad Witt, who used to represent this area, now represents Columbia County and has always been pro-LNG. Ginny Burdick, another name that we've talked about here, who blocked the National Popular Vote legislation in the House Rules Committee, Peter Courtney, who has previously blocked the National Popular Vote legislation as president, and Richard Devlin, who initially tried to get the National Popular Vote legislation referred to the voters, which would have turned that into just a money fest for out-of-state money coming in to defeat it. So all of these all of these people are influential in the state of Oregon, and are what propelling the Jordan Cove project forward. So now I'd like to turn it over to the folks in Douglas County, and so they can tell their story about what this looked like from their perspective. So go ahead, Douglas County.
My name is John Clark. I am an affected landowner. I am 82 years old. I've been involved in this fight since 2005, when they first came to my house and said they were going to put a pipeline through. I said, okay, you can do that. You can bring your surveyors in, and they did. And they promised, because I'm timbered land, I need the high ground to log. And I do selective logs throughout. The trees are mature. They then said they would protect my roads, and they started setting their stakes. I watched them stake the property, and they went right. I had two major intersections and a couple of roads that gave me access to the high ground. The center line of that pipeline went right through those intersections and down the roads. And so at that time, I knew they had lied to me. And so I told them to leave. I went to their office and gave them a written notice saying, leave. And I went to the surveyors and say, you have to leave. And I have never let them back on. Now, there wasn't much activity going on here because we only have 7 miles of coastal influenced land in Douglas County. So the bulk of it was happening in Coos Bay. And I then joined up with the people in Coos Bay, and I was involved in a hearing against a planning department's decision. And I was joined by Jody McCaffrey from Citizens Against LNG. And together we had an attorney, and we were having a hearing. They prolonged that hearing. And during that hearing, they then changed the ordinance, a portion of the ordinance which has to do with the airport down there because of it didn't comply with it. And they, under the guise of housekeeping, Coos County commissioners removed the language from the airport out of that ordinance. And that hearing went away. Since that time, I've involved myself in probably 6, 7 appeals, lawsuits. And the thing has been destroying me. But you must remember this, that when your property is under the threat of eminent domain, you're not going to find a buyer for it because you have to disclose it. And so we've been held hostage for a dozen years. So I'd like to, if there's questions or any of that, if there's things about what you can do to help us, get in touch with the Douglas County Democratic Office. They have placards here that we can give you to put in your cars. We can give you websites that you can visit to get information. And I have placards. I'll show them, you know, that oops, sorry. Sorry. One shows the Cascadia Fault because that is one of the locations that they want to put the gas processing facility, along with being right next to the airport. And there's 84 million gallons of LNG proposed to be stored there. That's a lot of stuff.
And what's the name of your group that you created?
Pardon me?
What is the name of the group that you created to oppose this?
Well, we Citizens Against LNG.
And Landowners United.
And Landowners United.
The eminent domain issue is really a big deal, both for these folks in Southern Oregon who are fighting a still very, very active LNG proposal, and for those of us in the northern part of the state who have successfully defeated two. In the northern part of the state, the pipeline was going to go through not only farmland and forest land, as he's talking about, but also through people who had so much money, decades involved in their land, invested in their land. So things like orchards and things like vineyards. And the LNG people would come in and say, well, but we're going to pay you for your land. If you are ripping a hole through a vineyard that you have been planting and tending for a decade or more and are just coming to the part where you can harvest, and then trying to make economic decisions about whether or not you're going to reinvest and take on more investment, this threat of eminent domain is really critical and very destructive economically to the entire state of Oregon.
So do we have any questions about eminent domain and the pipeline, or should we go to the next segment?
No, there's still a lot more to say about what's going on down here in Douglas County. For one thing, the Jordan Cove project, the terminal is the real issue. And we feel the best way to defeat the pipeline is to defeat the terminal. And there's some darn good arguments against it. Over the past week here, I heard a report on KLCC that there is a tsunami mapping project done by DOGAMI, the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, that dramatically revises the tsunami mapping along the coast, and it's been suppressed for over 4 years now. And that report needs to come out. The other thing is that the people that want to build this, I don't give them sinister motivations. They're hunting for jobs and economic development. But the Chetco fire is a monster, and there's 17 miles of the Stouts Creek fire that had the pipeline running right through the middle of it. And if this pipeline comes in here, this new proposal dramatically increases the pressure in the pipe from, 14 to 17?
Yes.
But so the quality of the work needs to be of a lot higher quality than what's originally proposed. They want the lowest pipeline standards allowable to come through the forest lands of Douglas County. This is rugged terrain. This is some of the ruggedest terrain in the state. And where we do have jurisdiction is in the coastal zone, where they go over Weaver Ridge up there in Camas Valley. And this was created by an earthquake. And if these guys don't do a quality job, or if there's something goes wrong, it's the taxpayers in Portland they're going to pick up the tab big time. And this Chetco fire is a monster, and it is going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to put out. And that's the kind of outcome we could have from a faulty pipeline built through Douglas County.
Yeah, Jordan Cove is the next segment, and let's show slide 24. It shows you the scope of the project. This project we call the zombie LNG project. We thought it was dead. It had been in approval process through FERC for a couple of years, and they finally said that there was no economic basis for this project and denied it. And then we had the election in last November. So could we queue up the news report that we have? what this is the owners of the pipeline project sharing what they just got out of a meeting with Donald Trump.
Well, we talked about a great project that we're working on called Jordan Cove. It's really meets all the targets for what President Trump wants to do about putting money to work, get it off the sidelines and into work. So we were talking about what it would take to get the project built and get it going.
Mr. Alsop, in the last administration, this Jordan Cove project was caught in a regulatory quagmire. This, of course, has direct implications for the Pacific Connector gas pipeline. Did you get assurances from Mr. Cone, from this White House, that they're going to be able to move this project forward?
Well, I think what we got was the commitment to work with us to make sure that there was oversight for the federal groups that are going to be on the permitting process, and that'll be very important and very helpful.
How many jobs are we talking about here?
4,000 construction jobs for the first 5 years, and then
where?
In Coos Bay, Oregon. And then 240 permanent jobs ongoing. And these are going to be high-paying jobs. They're going to be $75,000 to $85,000 per job. And right now in Coos Bay, the average salary is about $32,000. So these are going to be a big boost to the port and the city of Coos Bay.
So, as we know, infrastructure has been a huge priority for this administration. They want to talk about a $1 trillion infrastructure package, this energy sector, part of that. But, Mr. Althoff, is there a timeline here that you got from this administration for when they want to see an infrastructure package move through Congress?
We didn't get anything about that. We're going to fund this package. This is an $8 to $10 billion project that's going to be privately funded. The White House is going to work on us with helping us get through the permitting process as quickly and as efficiently, and the message to us was, hurry up, get going.
So what is the timeline then to move the Jordan Cove project along?
Well, we hope to be able to get through to FID by mid-2019, but if we can move the permitting up and speed the permitting up, I think we can get it up into potentially the beginning of 2019 or maybe 2018.
And I know you're busy, so just final question here in the minute or so we have left. What do you make of this administration from a regulatory standpoint, compare it with the last administration, and what it means for your company's bottom line?
It's hugely helpful.
Yes. So the zombie project is back. We have about 5 minutes left. Douglas County, was there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, one of the things that we have, of course, the same problem you had in Clatsop County, which is we have 3 commissioners who have given the go-ahead to this project, who are backing it all the way. And we are in the process, as I told you at the State Central Committee meeting, trying to do a home rule charter. It may or may not pass this first time, but we pretty much concluded the same thing you have, is we have to change who's running this county if we want to get anything done against LNG. The thing you mentioned about Clatsop also is John is a former firefighter, and he knows well that we do not have the ability to fight a fire in a pipeline area if one should occur. And as Richard Chasm said, there has been one already that burned through where they want to go, and there are ones burning all around us right now.
John or Richard, was anything you'd like to add?
I suppose people wonder what I was offered for compensation. And it was less than $2,000. Now they came out with an offer of about $30,000, but they've increased the damage that they're going to do by more than, 3 times. And that doesn't even pay the cost of the trees.
Yeah, the proposal has been evolving. Originally, they came in, offered people very little money. And the amount of money has been that they're offering people for the right-of-way has been going up. Originally, they wanted a 2-year option, and now they want a 5-year option, and they want to own the timber on that right-of-way. And one of the big reasons the county commissioners are in favor of this, is the timber industry wants the timber off that right of way. We really have very foggy ideas of how much volume we're talking about, but in the original EIS, they said that the same amount of timber would come off of the Bureau of Land Management ownerships as the National Forest, and that's baloney. There's far more timber on the National Forest. We estimate 200 to possibly 400 million board feet of timber on the market without any right of appeal, and that's why the Douglas County Commissioners are in favor, because they're basically henchmen for the timber industry. But I think the Jordan Cove issue is significant, because that terminal is in direct path. It's on a sand spit that is within half a mile of the ocean. And when the earthquake occurs, this terminal is in the direct path of the earthquake and tsunami. And we have some of the best experts on what happens in an earthquake, tsunami, in volcanic activity at Oregon State and University of Oregon. And it's possible for political people or elected officials to say, well, I'm in favor of this, but it needs to be done right. And Oregon's experts need to have the final say here, not experts purchased by the company. Because when you look at the facts of the science of what will happen, this is an extremely foolish idea.
And I just want to make a few comments about the claims that the owners of the project were making in terms of jobs. You know, there might be 4,000 jobs involved with the construction, but they're going to be mostly people brought in from out of the county. There's very few people within the county that they're going to employ. And when they talk about 240 jobs paying $85,000, they're not 240 jobs that are going to be in Coos County. There's going to be a handful of managers that are going to make that kind of money, and then the rest of the jobs are going to be low-paying maintenance jobs, or they're going to be jobs back on the East Coast where the corporate headquarters is. That's really making all of this stuff work. So I think if this project goes through, the economic impact is going to be significantly less than what they have been promised. And then, you know, what do? The facility's in, everyone says, oh, well, sorry, you're stuck with it. Have a nice life. Do we have any questions?
I think it's really extremely difficult for them to find an investor.
Good.
There are a lot of questions and comments. Stock post, are there any protests of Trump opening up Oregon national parks for lumberjacking? I think Richard Chasm kind of pointed out the issue of Douglas County, and maybe something that we want to have a show about regarding the timber industry and particularly its control in certain areas. But we have Phil Britton, ironically, the entire oil pipeline network, a very designed to launder oil shipped to JINA. Most of this current extraction is not for America, but is done in the name of national security.
Now, I don't understand why exporting energy is not treason, but that's a different topic. Anything else?
Yeah. Real Jingy, we need to show no benefit for their actions, as through their actions betray their policies and public image. Stock Post, we need to invest in more technology to replace oil. ExxonMobil is extracting American natural gas and funneling to Mexico for compression and shipping offshore. People made comments about how informative this was, and frankly, there were so many comments coming in, I kind of lost track of where some of them were going.
Wonderful.
Someone had mentioned about solar. So off the coastline being beautiful. There's also the environmental coffee house offering to help and talking about how in New York there's been success in fighting them. So I guess some just comments about more take on what is happening.
Cool. So this program will be stored online on the YouTube channel for Uphill Media or Bernie 2016 TV. So you can share this with your friends and neighbors and associates and anyone else who wants to see what's going on here. So let's go to slide 25.
I will in a second, Larry. I just want to say one thing. Thank you, everybody, for your comments out there and engaging in this the discussion. And you all know what to do, right? You all know what to do. If you're in this area, get involved. And it sounds to me like we have some people right around my neighborhood that need to help. So thank you for bringing this to our attention, Larry. Appreciate it.
So tell your representative and senator that you oppose LNG in Oregon. We just had some discussions with legislators, and the issue of LNG came up, and so they were explaining to us why, the people in the metro area have to support the legislators in Southern Oregon, because if we don't get their support, then they don't support our bill. So this issue for those of us in rural communities ends up being traded around like a baseball card. And so what we really need to do is make this a top tier issue, like women's rights and gay rights and the others that are untouchable, so that this is not a negotiable item that can be traded off for someone else's project. Tell candidates that you will not support them if they vote for LNG terminals. So half of the Senate is coming up for election in 2018, and all of the members of the House of Representatives, of which there are 60, are coming up for election. So when they have their campaign trips, get a commitment from them to oppose LNG if that's what you believe should happen. And then, although this would be a stretch, we would love to have the legislators repeal the 2011 legislation in House Bill 2700, which is what gave eminent domain to corporations. It is opposed in our platform, and that piece of legislation should be repealed.
And I think bottom line on all of this is that average citizens can make a difference. And democracy, especially at the local level, does work. And the permitting process on all of these fossil fuel infrastructures is very complex. There's permitting at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, and it becomes this alphabet soup, and it's like a maze. But working at the local level with the people that we elected or need to recall and elect new people, you can make a difference. Citizens do have an impact.
So we are, go ahead.
Maybe somebody did raise the waffling of Merkley on the issue. Maybe you could touch upon, the problem with this politically a little more.
Well, clearly, the corporations have come and sold people on the jobs issues. And so it's created an awkward situation with the unions. But unions don't get, we all love the unions and we want unions to have jobs, but they don't get to destroy our environments on the way to creating those jobs. And so, what we need is for our legislators to step up and speak the truth to these people, really talk about the true impact of these projects and how the economic benefits have been overinflated, so that we have we're going all in with accurate data. We would love to have these kinds of jobs, but they're just not going to pan out. So I didn't mean to just focus on the legislature. So we have our 4 members of the House of Representatives, and then we have our 2 senators, and then of course we have Kate Brown, who is also waffling on this issue as well, who is up for re-election. So please go to their campaign stops and make your opinion, express your opinion to them.
Barry,
So,
can I chime in one last thing here?
Yes.
It's important. The impact is local, but the cost is spread across all of the taxpayers of Oregon. And when this thing goes wrong, it's a white elephant for the entire state. When the earthquake occurs, it could easily be in the lifetime of Jordan Cove. The cost of the impact of what will happen down there, all of the taxpayers, and those taxpayers are primarily in Portland. They're the union workers. They are going to pick up the tab.
Thank you, Richard. So we are members of the Progressive Caucus that is working on progressive issues in Oregon. We would love for people from across the state to join our group. If you would like to join, go to www.pdpo.org. And we also have a matching contribution campaign going on. So any amounts you give to us will be matched. Thank you so much for joining us today. Stay tuned for next week for our next show. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Can we go?